We go through our days thinking we are reasonable and rational beings, but we are much more susceptible to manipulation than we might think. And it's truer now more than ever before. Stephen Hassan, a licensed therapist and expert on cults and high control organizations, says that because of the sheer amount of information coming our way and the speed with which we receive it, coupled with our fast-paced, overworked, and overscheduled world, has created a perfect storm of vulnerability, because sensory overload can make anyone more susceptible to suggestion. Cults proliferate when society is undergoing rapid change, and particularly when there is a breakdown of trust between people and major institutions, which is why it's so important to stay aware of their manipulation tactics, especially now. Cults love to take vulnerable men and women and promise them a better life, whether that's through enlightenment, financial freedom, or something more spiritual. Cults always hide their greed and manipulation tactics under the guise of a mission statement. They want you to believe they lend a helping hand to the poor, the sick, and/or the unholy. They want you to believe they are making the world a better place. And how do cults grow a following? It usually starts with one malignant narcissist. Let's take a quick look at two well-known cult leaders. Vernon Howe was born to a single mom in Texas. He grew up poor and claimed to have had the Bible memorized by the age of 18. Howe was also a musician, but not the rock and roll kind that he so desperately craved to be. His ex-followers recall him being a drifter. He was disheveled and never had a steady job and drove a car he said the Lord gave to him. In the 1980s, he joined a splinter group of the Seventh-day Adventist Church called the Branch Davidians. This is where Howe became heavily indoctrinated, and in the 1990s, he changed his name to David Koresh. 2 years later, he had taken over the group and fed them a steady message about the apocalypse and the end of days, and encouraged his members to stockpile guns and ammunition because he believed the Branch Davidians were God's chosen people. Therefore, they would one day be under attack. Koresh and his followers lived in a compound in Waco, Texas, and in just a few short years, Koresh began placing more demands on his followers. He ordered everyone in his group to embrace celibacy, including married couples, so they could focus on God and the Branch Davidian way. Eventually, Koresh claimed that God had chosen him and his seed as the one pure way, and said that all the marriages in the group were now dissolved, and he would take all of the women in the group as his wives if he wanted them, even though Koresh was legally already married to one woman. Although I love the show Netflix did on Koresh and his cult, I thought they made him out to be a little more innocent than he was. Not only were children beat daily under the guise of discipline in the Branch Davidians, but Koresh even took a child bride for himself, a girl as young as 10 years old. To make a long story short, in 1993, the FBI became suspicious of Koresh and the Branch Davidians' massive armory and provoked the cult members into a 51-day standoff that ended with their compound going up in flames. The FBI said the fire was started by the cult members as a suicide pact, but ex-members say that is a lie and said that the fire was caused by a known accelerant called tear gas, which FBI agents threw into the compound after ramming the building with tanks. By the end of it, 76 Branch Davidians, including 28 children, died in the flames, including Koresh himself. But some of his followers believe that, like Jesus, Koresh is not dead and will come back one day. Now let's move on to Jim Jones. At the height of the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s, Jim Jones was the minister of the People's Temple in San Francisco, California, and he preached a progressive message about inclusion and changing the world, and he preached it to a mostly Black congregation. Because of his more worldly views, Jones grew a following that was estimated to be in the thousands and included some politicians. But this pastor's ego grew too big for his head, and he became paranoid of media scrutiny of his church's suspicious activities. Because of this, Jones spun a narrative to his followers that the media was not to be trusted, that the media was fake news, and that the people of the People's Temple were not safe. In 1977, Jones and almost 1,000 of his followers packed up and moved to Guyana, east of Venezuela. They lived in a jungle encampment they built by themselves. They built everything, including sidewalks, sanitation, housing, water, electricity, food production, livestock care, schools, meal preparation, and libraries from scratch. And they named it Jonestown. Some followers described it as a prison camp, while others called it heaven on earth. According to a diary that belonged to one of the members named Edith, a 63-year-old former college professor, she wrote the people of Jonestown had multiple services a day where they sat and listened to Jones's sermons, some lasting until 1 or 2 in the morning. Jim Jones had also brought his pet monkey to Guyana, a chimpanzee by the name of Mr. Muggs. Jones told his followers he had rescued Muggs from an animal testing lab, but that was a lie, as Mr. Muggs had been purchased at a pet store in Los Angeles. Mr. Muggs grew to be 130 pounds and was very social with the members of the People's Temple. But Jones's dream of a utopia was fading fast, as he was growing more paranoid by the day. Back in California, a congressman was receiving letters from concerned family members of the people in Jonestown, and so the congressman decided to fly to Guyana himself to see what Jonestown was all about. He traveled with several journalists and the relatives of some of the members, and together they saw Jonestown. But while they were there, some of the members who had helped build it told the congressman they wanted to return to the States, and Jim Jones saw this as betrayal. As the congressman, the relatives, and some of the defectors waited at an airstrip to board a plane, Jim Jones sent some of his members to gun them down. The congressman and 4 people were killed. Then, Jones urged his more than 900 followers in Jonestown to commit suicide by drinking cyanide-laced punch, which is where the phrase, drinking the Kool-Aid, comes from. Jones ordered the children drink the punch first, and then everyone else. Along with a few dogs, Mr. Muggs was shot 3 times. Only 33 people survived Jonestown. What I've just shown you are 2 extreme examples of cults. But what happens when lesser-known cults and high-control organizations slowly infiltrate their way into our daily lives and routines? How would we know? What would we even look out for? Contrary to popular belief, there are many documented cases of highly intelligent people, such as doctors, scientists, and lawyers who join cults. Although I'm no rocket scientist, I consider myself to be a well-rounded and well-adjusted member of society. In 2013, I had been a hairstylist for 5 years with a large clientele. I lived with my then boyfriend of 4 years and had lots of friends and my immediate family nearby. I would hang out with my friends on the weekend, have a Sunday lunch with my family, take care of our dogs, and get ready for another week at the salon. So how did I fall for a commercial cult? It happened in small doses. I was looking to get healthier, and I happened to come across someone offering to coach me with their workout programs and health shake. So I said, okay, why not? I'll try it. I liked the product and I lost some of the weight and felt better, and before I knew it, I was presented with a business opportunity, an opportunity where I could potentially help others do what I did and make money from it. I thought, okay, why not try it for a little bit and see how it goes? Before I knew it, I stopped going out on weekends with friends so I could work my business, and when I would see family, I was always rushed because I knew there was a post I should be making to recruit people to my team, or somebody to message, or a self-help book I needed to read. Within less than 2 years, I was able to quit my job at the salon and go all in with the company. By my 3rd year, I was in the top 1%, but my life almost seemed no longer my own. I was always on, and pretty much everything in my life revolved around the company. I also noticed people who left the company were shunned, and the distributors looked at the CEO and the company as being able to do no wrong. A lot of us started to get sick from stress, and I wonder, what did we really sign up for? When we mentioned how hard things were becoming, we were told to read more personal development and work harder, or buy a training course from a self proclaimed guru online. I slowly started waking up to a lot of things I hadn't noticed before, and I got to peek behind the curtain of the top performers in the company, and it was ugly. I ended up joining 2 other companies thinking they would be different until I realized it's not the company, it's the business model. It took me almost 6 years before I finally walked away from the multi-level marketing industry, and I have no doubt what kept me in so long was the toxic positivity. If I attempted to use my critical thinking skills and voice anything that went against the CEO or the company, I was told I was being negative. If I ever complained about one tiny thing, I was told to be careful what I was putting out into the universe because the law of attraction is always working and I would get back what I put out. And at the end of the day, every MLM loves to tell you that you are helping people, and the only way you can fail is if you quit. And let's not forget, if you stop buying product, then you're not going to be helping yourself. And if you're not helping yourself, then how can you help others? And you do want to help other people, right? This type of rhetoric programmed me to shut down any questionable concerns I had about the MLM for fear of being seen as negative or causing bad things to happen to myself or other people. And this kind of thinking even caused me to stay silent for almost 2 years after leaving the MLM industry because I felt so much shame and I was scared of becoming a pessimist or being looked at as a failure. But I now realize I, along with many others, had been a part of a commercial cult. In this video, I interview Duncan, a licensed therapist and former cult member. He and his wife Wendy live in Dallas, Texas, and they ended up leaving their cult because the cult leader didn't want them to get married. In an act of defiance, they chose each other and now live happily and have 8 grandchildren. But the scars still remain, and they now work to bring awareness to others because they know how conspicuously cults can infiltrate our society. Doug and I discuss the mindset it takes to stay aware daily and how to avoid toxic positivity in your life so you can truly live free and avoid becoming a victim. Because where there is smoke, there's fire. So I had told you some in the email. I was in the top 1% of network marketing or
Mm-hmm.
multi-level marketing. And one of the ways that I started my whole deconstruction process, which actually took longer than I thought, was when I
Right.
watched Scientology and the Aftermath with Leah
Mm-hmm.
Remini.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really began diving into cults and cult tactics. And then I found Stephen Hassan and the bite model. And then I found your interview fascinating because you were in a cult. So can you share that experience? Because I would like to really show, and obviously you are a licensed therapist. So
Right.
I would love to get your opinion and not try and sway my audience in either way, but just get your opinion on how multi-level marketing has a lot of the same tendencies as
Sure.
cults.
Right. Right. Well, my story is not unusual. When I was 18 years old, I first met my former cult leader. Right. I actually met him right as I was leaving for college my freshman year. So that is a time of transition for young people, and I did go off and attend my freshman year, but then when I came back after being gone for one school year, um, I got involved with him. So I was a freshman in college. I went off. I did my freshman year. I came back, and then the summer between my freshman and sophomore year is when I really got involved with my cult leader. And again, that's a time of life where people are very uh, much in transition. Their identity, their adult identity isn't formed. They're trying to figure out who they're going to be, what they want to do with their life. They want their life to matter. People at that age are very idealistic. So that is why a lot of cults do recruit on college campuses, because those are people who are maybe the most open to, to that kind of appeal. I certainly was open. I was vulnerable. My cult leader put a lot of energy into trying to recruit and persuade me, and to get me into his little Bible-based quasi-Christian group, and I fell right in. I was in and out a little bit for the first 2 or 3 years. Honestly, the cult hadn't completely coalesced at that point. It was still trying to form. But by the time I was 21 years old, I was solidly in, and I stayed in for the next 21 years, half my life, until the time when I left when I was 42.
Wow. Wow. And so with this cult, uh, was the name of it the Dallas cult or?
No, it just happened to be in Dallas.
Oh, okay.
So, but it was just a little one-off Christian group led by a very charismatic and persuasive person.
They always are.
And they always are. And it's kind of interesting, and I was thinking about this a little bit before this call. The similarities between cults and multi-level marketing groups. And one of the things, all of the groups, whether it's MLM or cults, religious cults, psychotherapy cults, Bible-based cults, Eastern cults, they've all got something that they're holding out as this, great shining city on a hill, Shangri-La. With Christian cults, it's usually salvation. You're going to go to heaven. You're going to be, this is what you have to do to be part of the elect. With Eastern cults, it's enlightenment, what you have to do to reach enlightenment and get off the wheel of reincarnation or whatever.
I'm seeing a lot of that now with the mindfulness movement.
Right. Yeah. And then you have New Age cults, they have their own version of enlightenment. With multi-level marketing, a lot of time it's financial freedom. That's the way they'll talk about it. Your best lifestyle. With psychotherapy cults, it's being your best self. Having authenticity or whatever it is. But there's always some ideal that they're holding up that says, this is what you can be. This is what your life can be. And the great irony is, what they're really selling to people is human flourishing. This is what you need to flourish. But what happens is the opposite. Instead of helping you flourish, they end up diminishing you and making you really less than you would have been otherwise, instead of more, because instead of adding to you, they take away from you. They take your time, they take your relationships, they take your idealism, and
money.
Of course, your money. Exactly. And they exploit that and use it for themselves. So there's a lot of similarity just in the fact that they are all holding up some grand ideal, but that's, as people ultimately find out, not the reality.
Correct. And these commercial cults, I've noticed, are getting very clever in their marketing, and they're not just promoting financial freedom anymore. They have a mission. So for example, with the first company I was in, it was a health and wellness company.
Mhm.
And a lot of us started to lose our income by like 60%. And it was fast. And we were like, oh my gosh, our livelihoods are going, what's going on? And we're also trying to bring people in with like, hey, you can do this, you can make money. And then all of a sudden we're like, wait, we're losing our money. How can we preach that? And so the mission, instead of changing the compensation plan to help better the distributors, all of a sudden they created this mission that like, no, you guys, you just need to work harder. But remember, we're helping people. We
Right.
are saving people from obesity. We are helping people with their nutrition, yada, yada. And it all just became about like the mission, the mission, the mission. And I've noticed with all these other MLMs, it's very much the same thing. They all have a mission. There's a makeup company that they support a charity for battered women, but it's a very questionable charity that
Yeah.
was founded
Yeah.
by them. And just all these things. I had a woman reach out to me last month, and she knew my involvement with the MLM community and that I was, really big in it, which I'm trying to now like do a lot of reversal from that.
Right.
And she just reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm not trying to recruit you. I'm not trying to do anything like that. I just want your opinion on this company I found. It's brand new. It's a makeup company." And she knew I was a licensed cosmetologist and used to be a makeup artist for Estee Lauder. So I was very hesitant to encourage her, but I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll look at it for you and tell you what I think of their makeup." Like, obviously, as a woman of color, I wanted to make sure, let's make sure
Right.
that they have all the shade ranges.
Sure.
But I just was like, I looked at it and they had hardly anything. And I went back to the message and I said, "So what do you love about this makeup so much that made you join the company?" And she said, "Oh, well, I actually haven't tried the product yet, but I really love what they stand for."
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was just like, oh my gosh.
Well, and that is part of the thing that they're exploiting in people is their idealism. And that's why a lot of religious cults will recruit on college campuses because people are young and idealistic and they want to better the world. They want to make an impact. What's wrong with that? And the truth is there's nothing wrong with that, but it gets exploited by these unscrupulous manipulators, who take people's idealism and use it for their own ends.
Absolutely. I wrote down a bunch of questions for you because I was like, I
Okay,
don't want to
yeah.
leave anything out. I was really excited. So one of my questions was, how did you tie up your loose ends after leaving? Because you and your wife both left. And how
Hmm.
did you tie up those loose ends after getting out of the cult? Besides like going back to school and
Hmm.
getting your master's, what did that look like? Because I know for a lot of people, leaving these things, leaving cults, leaving commercial cults, it's very damaging.
Yes. Yeah. And people often are left feeling very devastated when they leave because everything you thought was going to save you turned out not to, and the people you believed in turn their back on you sometimes, and so it can be very, very devastating and damaging to people. And as a licensed counselor now, I focus my private practice on helping people who have been through these devastating experiences because often they will need to do some counseling to process, golly, what just happened to me. In the case of my wife and me, we uh, talk about what it was like for us when we first left. We spent every night at the dinner table, just she and I talking. And we were so fortunate that we left together. And in fact, um, it's a long story that my wife actually wrote a book about. But the cult wouldn't let us get married, and so we eloped and got married anyway, and that set off a series of events that ended up in us leaving. So we did have each other. We left together, and we had each other. So we spent a lot of time processing with each other. We both went to counseling. We were lucky in that we found a good counselor who was willing to learn about cults. She wasn't cult informed when we met her, but she was open and she was a good listener, and she knew basic counseling really well. So she helped us a lot. And then we started to learn about it. We started to read the books. We read Steve Hassan's book, among others. I strongly recommend Combating Cult Mind Control by Steve Hassan as a good book to read for people who have just left cults. In fact, that was one of the ones that was recommended to us when we first left by somebody, a friend of mine who had left earlier. He had left some years earlier, and of course, when we left, we called him and he said, get Steve Hassan's book, Combating Cult Mind Control, and go through it with a highlighter and highlight all the parts that you can relate to. And of course, if you do that, you end up with most of the book highlighted because a lot of it applies. We also started reading other books, and in fact, my wife and I are both readers, so we ended up reading quite a bit, and eventually she wrote her own book. So we educated ourselves, we processed, we went to counseling, we talked with each other, we started to connect with other friends of ours who were former members of our group, and that was helpful to talk with other people who had come out, and we shared experiences with them and processed with them as well. And then eventually, after my wife wrote her book, just a few years after we were out, and I don't recommend anybody do this right away. First of all, do your own healing, and realize it's going to take a little bit of time. Read, process, talk to friends, talk to other former members of your group, talk to former members of other groups. But we just kind of threw ourselves into learning about it. And then 4 or 5 years after we were out, we started 5 or 6 years after we were out, we started a support group for former members of cults. One thing that I like to tell people is that it's actually helpful to talk to people in other types of groups, because then you can start to see the similarities, and you realize that what you've really been through is a process of thought reform and mind control, and you see how it works in other groups, and that actually gives you more insight into how it worked in your group. Unfortunately, I know everybody wants to believe that their group was absolutely unique, but they're not. They're not. There's a lot of this stuff out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things that you mentioned is, you surrounded yourself with people who had been out, you read books on cults and things, but some of us don't even know that we were in a cult.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't for me. It wasn't until, because after I left the network marketing world, I remember, I would watch documentaries on cults. I would watch the Leah Remini show, and I could see all the similarities. But it wasn't until I joined a group that was an anti-MLM group. And it took joining a few, because, there are some that are just mean and vicious, and they just want to make fun of the people inside these commercial cults. And I joined it was called an anti-MLM survivors group is what it was called. And I joined it. And then in there, I was introduced to the bite model. And I realized, oh my gosh, a licensed therapist created this, and it's used all around the world to recognize cults. There's so much of the bite model that coincides with MLM and what happens in an MLM. And it really made me realize this was like a cult-like experience. No wonder I went through everything I did. So when did you first have that light bulb moment that, like, hey, I'm in a cult?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that I had it until I got out.
Right.
And it was probably not until I left and I read Steve Hassan's book, The Combating Cult Mind Control, that I realized, holy cow, this was a cult. And we had heard things over the years. While you're in the group, you say, oh, they think we're a cult, ha ha ha. But then you get out and you really start to understand what a cult is and what you've been through. And that's when you realize, oh my goodness. The one thing that I would say, about the people making fun of the people who are still in there, that's, those people are victims. They're not, they didn't start out to say, oh, I think I'll join a cult today. Or here, I think I'm going to get hooked up with something that's going to take all my money and take all my time and destroy my relationships and ruin my life. Nobody sets out to do that. They get swindled, just a little bit at a time. They get taken in by a very persuasive, skilled manipulator, and they have some need or vulnerability that manipulator is able to tie into and exploit. And that's how people get into those groups. So I have nothing but compassion for the people who are still in those groups. I was there myself once. I get it. They're not bad people. They're just looking for a way to better their life, and they just stumbled into the wrong thing.
Absolutely. A form of subtle manipulation that I experienced was toxic positivity,
Hmm.
which I didn't even know was a term until more recently. But it's where you question something, and all of a sudden you're being told that you're negative,
Hmm.
and not to
Hmm.
question things, and oh, you need to do more personal development, you need to do more self-help. I read over 200 self-help books in the 5 years I was in, and I was
Yeah.
constantly like, anytime I would think negative, anytime I would
Right.
question the MLM I was in, or how things were going, or things were just so hard, where I felt so drained in the work I was doing, I just thought, oh, I need more personal development. I need more personal development. I need to think positive, because I was constantly told it was negative. So can you give us some examples of like subtle manipulation that they use?
Yeah. Well, and what you're talking about right there, and that's something that all cults do. That's a thought stopping technique. So, it, and they have to train their followers to do that, because if they let you just really think it through and really examine what's going on to yourself and what's going on around you, then you would see something isn't right here. So all cults do that. They teach some form of thought stopping. So that was your thought stopping. It's like, I can't think negatively. Therefore, it's impossible for me to ever think badly about my group, even if something is seriously wrong here.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, let's face it. If your house is on fire, it's a negative thought to think the house is on fire, but you'd better think it,
If you
because
want to live, yeah.
you want to live. Exactly. So negative thoughts have their purpose. Sometimes things are negative, and we need to know that. So the idea that you have to just stop your thought anytime you think anything negative, no. Maybe there's a tiger that's about to eat you, and you you need to run away.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be an example of cult-like thinking or thought reform, is the thought stopping. Um, One book that we read, and I think Steve Hassan would tell you the same thing, kind of the seminal work in the entire field of cults, is a book called The Psychology of Totalism, a study of brainwashing in China, by Robert Lifton. And he was a guy, he initially he's a psychiatrist, and he initially got interested in what was happening to the American POWs in Korea, where they would be captured by the North Koreans during the Korean War, and they would be held in prison for a little while, and then they would come out, denouncing America and saying, they're against capitalism and all that. So, he said, how can you take, you know, good American patriotic soldiers and and just turn them inside out like that? How do you do that? That's how he got interested in that. And so he does a study of what happened with some people in China, um, and he just, he goes through, and he comes up with these different techniques that thought control environments have. Um, the loading the language is one of them. They teach you a whole vocabulary, and so you can go to uh, any group, even an MLM group, any cult. They'll have some of their own vocabulary. They'll have words that they use that are not necessarily the kinds of things that you hear, being said, in normal life with normal people.
So with loading the language, I've heard this before,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very interesting to me. And you say like they'll have words that people don't know. Um, can you give us some examples of loading the language, like things that they'll use, like maybe what you experienced or something?
Right. Um, and it's not necessarily words that other people don't know, but they'll have kind of their own definition of it, or they'll have their own sense of it, that marks a difference between insiders in the group and outsiders. Now, we were a Christian group, so we talked about a lot of things that Christian cultic groups talk about: picking up your cross, laying down your life. We would talk about, somebody's getting life from something, which meant that they weren't laying down their life, they were getting life from something.
Living
So
to die.
yeah, you can die to self, and a lot of the Christian groups use some of those same words. We always talked about the doctrine, which the doctrine was shorthand for, the entire teaching of our group. What our specific understanding of the Bible and so on. But your mind is the Antichrist was a thing we used to say. Your brain. Yeah, it was a perfect thought stopping technique, because anytime your brain was telling you unfaithful thoughts, you would say, well, that's just the Antichrist, it's in your brain there, so you try to shut off those thoughts. But it was just like any other group. Your multi-level marketing group, they'll have things about success, or about your best life, or about financial freedom, or different things that normally in polite conversation, people are not necessarily talking about things like that, and probably not using those words in exactly the same way that the MLMs would. The average person would be, financial freedom would be, hey, I got all my bills paid this month. I'm fine. I got the rent paid. I'm okay.
Yeah, and that's what I noticed too in multi-level marketing, was even after being in the top 1% where you're considered successful,
Mm-hmm.
I still constantly was hustling. I felt like I could never take
Mm-hmm.
a break. And I
Right.
remember thinking, okay, yes, there's some residual income flowing in, but you still have to work this really hard. And it
Right.
wasn't really until I got out that I realized, like, it's a deck of cards, that's
Right. Right. Well, and that's universal in cults, is you can never really feel like you're succeeding,
yes.
because that's that culture of purity. You're not doing it well enough. You're not doing, and I heard you talking about, I've got to do more, self-improvement. I've got to read more, I've got to read more books, and, work on myself and get my attitude right, so that I can, so that I can make this work. And also, all cults have a sacred science.
I
They
was
have.
going to ask you about that. I literally wrote
Yeah.
down sacred science because I wanted
Mhm.
you to tell us the behavior that people can exhibit in social groups, and what can happen in there.
Well, whatever it is going to vary from group to group, and an Eastern yoga cult may have a different sacred science than a Christian group. Christians may think I'm not praying enough, or I'm not reading the Bible enough, or whatever it is that they have to do to make the thing work. In your group, maybe you weren't reading enough self-help books, or whatever. And a lot of times, a lot of the multi-level marketing does have some crossover with Christian stuff in this country, or New Age stuff. But, so I'm not doing enough of X to make it work, whatever that is. And there's a sacred science. There's a way that you're supposed to be doing things, whether it's read the Bible, pray, confess your sins, sometimes fasting, or other things like that. But the point is, you can never do it well enough. You can never really succeed, because it's that guilt that keeps you going. It's that sense of, I'm not doing it right. So you have to believe that it's possible to do it right, but also that you're falling short, so that it's this never ending message of work harder. It's a never ending message of work harder. And that's how they keep you on the treadmill doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote down 5 things that I experienced, of how basically like I got roped into a cult and what happened. So I'm gonna just read you those 6 or 5 things that I wrote down, and then I want you to tell me what is like textbook from a cult